Hi guys, it's Elysia English and I'm coming at you with another DIY. Today I'm going to show you 3 different methods for framing your wood signs. The wood that I'll be using to frame the signs in this video, which is what I use in my shop, are 1x2s found at Home Depot. So the first technique I'm going to show you is what I call box frame. And I'm going to use my 1x2s and I'm going to line it up to the top. I always do the sides of my signs first, so my top and my bottom are longer. So I'm going to mark my line where I'm going to make a cut. So I flip my 1x2 over so I have another end and I'm going to do the other side. And mark my cut line. Make sure that when you're working in your shop that you always put your safety glasses on. I know it's really easy to get out of that habit, but you really want to make sure that you protect your eyes, especially when using a miter saw. So now I'm going to apply my glasses and cut my miter saw, and I have my miter saw set to 0, so just straight up and down. Keep your hands out of the way. Now that I have my sides cut, I'm going to do my top and bottom. I'm going to use the same method, so I'm going to butt it up, make sure it matches, and then draw my cut line. So now I'm going to line these up and make sure that everything fits the way that I want it to and that I'm happy with it. Looks like everything lines up great. Now I'm going to paint or stain my frames. Now that my frames are dry, I'm going to use just a very light sandpaper and I'm going to just distress my frames a little bit. It's just the look that I wanted for this. You don't have to do this step. I just run it along the edges. It just takes a little bit of the paint off and it actually makes the frame super smooth and gives it a nice finishing touch. So I'm now going to use my brad nailer to adhere my frame to my sign. So I always do the sides of my signs first. So I'm going to stand up my sign and put my frame along the side, and I'm going to make sure I butt it up exactly to both ends and make sure that the back is totally flush and hold it firmly. And then making sure that my brad nailer is straight up and down. I'm going to stay on the back 1/3 of the frame and fire a nail. And then I do it on the other end as well. And then you're going to want to put some in the middle as well. If you don't have a brad nailer at home, you can use some 1-inch finishing nails and a hammer to adhere your frame. When you get to doing the corners, you want to make sure you put a brad nail into the top of your frame corner here. And it's going to add some extra stability to your frame. So now that my frame's complete, you can see why it's called a box frame, because you're essentially just boxing in your sign design that you've created. So the second style of framing we're going to look at is mitered frames. Mitered frames are a little bit trickier, and I'm going to show you some tips on how to actually get accurate mitered corners. So the way I create my mitered corners is actually not to start by measuring my sign. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to start over at my miter saw. So when we were doing the box frame, when we were cutting our wood 1x2s, we were laying them flat and then cutting with the saw. When I'm making my miter frames, I'm actually going to stand up my 1x2s. And to start, I'm just going to make my first cut. My miter saw is set to 0 degrees. And I want to change by pinching my clip and moving it over to 45 degrees. And you want to make sure it's actually locked in, because it'll be properly calibrated to 45 degrees when it's locked. You want to make sure before you make a cut that your 1x2 is pushed firmly towards the bottom of the saw and it against the back. If it's raised up in any way or pulled out from the side, your 45 will not be accurate. Now that I have my first 45-degree angle, I'm going to use the inner corner of the angle and I'm going to line it up right to the end of the corner of my sign. And I'm going to make a mark on this side. So now I'm going to use my 1x2 and I'm going to try to line up without running my saw and make sure that where my saw cuts is right to the side of the line where I measured on my sign. So to start my top and bottom, I'm going to make my starting 45-degree like I did on the side. So I'm going to line up my edge to the edge of my sign, making sure it's perfectly on the mark. And then I'm going to make my line on this side. So now to cut the other side of my 1x2 mitered corner frame here, I'm going to swing my miter saw over to the other 45 and lock it in place because I want my angle to be this way. And if I keep it where it was, it would be the wrong direction. So once you've got your top all cut, you're going to do the exact same thing for the bottom. Now that my miter frame is made, I'm going to stain my frame. The reason I'm going to stain my frame is because if I painted it, I wouldn't see my nice mitered corner lines. After all that hard work, I definitely don't want to cover it up. So I'm really happy with the classic gray stain because I'm really going to see the mitered corners when I'm done. So now I'm going to nail my frame to my signboard. Okay, so now that you've mastered the box frame and the mitered frame, I'm going to challenge you to make the third style of frame that I like to use, and this is sometimes known as a rustic frame, or I like to call it the matted frame. I don't make a lot of rustic signs, so I do my matted frame a little bit different. I'm going to show you how. So I'm going to take my same 1x2s I've been using for the other two styles, and I'm going to start with my bottoms, and I'm using a 1/4-inch plywood for this base. I typically use a thicker pine board, but when doing this matted style, I use 1/4-inch plywood. So I'm going to put my 1x2 along, and I'm essentially going to box in my design. And I'm going to do that on the top as well. So similar to doing the box frame, we're going to lay our 1x2s down flat to make our cut, and watching for our line that we've created, and make our cut. Now that I have my top and my bottom cut, I'm going to do the same thing for the sides. Now that I have the perimeter of my sign created, I'm actually going to take apart what I've just made, and I'm going to set my actual design aside. Now I'm going to apply a generous layer of wood glue all the way around the frame I created. After applying a generous amount of glue, I'm going to build my frame back onto my design. So the next step to doing this rustic frame is to add your boxed frame to the outside. So you're going to be adding a taller outer frame alongside the one that you just applied. The reason I didn't paint or stain my inner frame first before gluing it on was because I'm actually going to paint it the same color as my background, and then my taller outer frame is actually going to be a bright sunny yellow. So before I do my outer frame, I'm going to paint my inner frame, and I'm going to paint the same color as my background. Now that my inner frame is painted and dried, I've distressed it a little bit with the same soft sandpaper, and I'm about to do a typical box frame on the outside edge. So I'm going to make sure I start with my sides first and then my tops, the same as I did for the first style of framing in the video. So now it's time to paint or stain your outer frame. And I chose to do mine a really bright golden yellow since mine says "You are my sunshine." So I didn't paint with full coverage on my frames because I want them to look distressed. So now I'm using my soft sandpaper. I'm just running it on the edges and giving it a really smooth finish and a distressed edging. So now that my frame is dried, ready to put on, I'm going to use my brad nailer again and put on my box frame. So you want to make sure that when you put your frame on that it's butted up to the very back of your plywood. I just want to take a quick second to thank everyone for all the feedback that I've been getting on my new videos. It is so inspiring to me to know that I'm inspiring you guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to work on the next project with you. I've had lots of messages and questions about where do I work on my projects. I'm really lucky that I have a studio attached to the garage at our house. Although I do utilize pretty much every square foot of our house when working on my projects for my business. Like for example, when my husband comes home from work and all of the furniture on the main floor has been pushed to one side so I can take a picture for staging. So as you can see, I kind of work everywhere and I make the spaces that I have work. Assure me in the comments I'm not the only one that does this. I hope you found this video informative. If you have any questions about framing, then let me know. Don't forget to paint that like button blue for me and subscribe to my channel.